Well, good morning. I want to thank Attorney General Ashley Moody for hosting us here and for her hard work. In 2020, at the beginning of the year, I ordered an investigation into the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence after reports indicated that officers of the nonprofit were receiving exorbitant compensation and that the coalition failed to provide accurate financial records to the Department of Children and Families. The organization was created in statute almost 20 years ago to administer the Certified Domestic Violence Program in Florida and has received state funds for this purpose. The funding was intended to help the thousands of domestic violence survivors and their families to rebuild each year. Instead, the organization under the CEO, Tiffany Carr, was compensated millions of dollars over a 3-year period. And we knew there must be accountability for the coalition's misuse of state dollars, complete lack of transparency, and betrayal of the public trust. And so we worked with the Florida legislature to quickly remove the organization from statute. In February 2020, I signed House Bill 1087. The organization's sole source contract was effectively terminated upon my signature. The following month, we moved forward with a lawsuit to recoup money that should have gone to the citizens of Florida for whom it was intended. So today, the Department of Children and Families and the Attorney General settled all pending civil actions against the coalition, the foundation, and its officers and directors for more than $5 million. The settlement requires the foundation to liquidate all remaining assets and pay domestic violence centers $1.1 million to serve survivors of domestic violence. The power that this group was given for almost 20 years and their misrepresentation of appropriation of state and federal funds is inexcusable, should not have happened, and it cannot be allowed to happen in other organizations that may be getting funding from the state of Florida. So once this was uncovered, I instructed the Inspector General, Melinda McGill, to do a deep dive into other nonprofits receiving a large amount of state funds to ensure that salary compensation is in line with federal and state regulations. And we don't want to see this repeated. Now, we don't have full results on that yet, and we have not yet identified something along these lines. Hopefully we won't, but that review is underway. You got to have accountability and transparency. That was obviously lacking with this organization for many, many years. I want to thank the Attorney General for pursuing this and vindicating the rights of Florida taxpayers. Also want to thank the legislature for moving very quickly back in 2020 to eliminate this sole source provision in the statute. And with that, I will turn it over to the Attorney General for some remarks.
Thank you so much, Governor. And we really appreciate those of you that are here today to join us for this important announcement. As you know, this administration and certainly Governor DeSantis, since taking office, has made it clear if someone is trusted by the voters or the state of Florida to do the work of this state, the important work in many instances like this one, protecting victims of domestic violence, they will be held to an extremely high standard, not only in the function of their work, but in terms of their integrity and the integrity of the office in which they are entrusted. And regardless of what your political affiliation, regardless of the circumstances, if you fail in that high expectation, this governor and this administration will hold you accountable and will ensure that you are no longer in that position to violate the public's trust. So today we are here to make the important announcement that the Florida Coalition of Domestic Violence, its foundation, will be dissolved, its assets liquidated, and the recovery of millions of dollars to the state of Florida, millions of dollars which should have originally gone to victims of domestic violence and not officers, directors, and certainly not Tiffany Carr for their own personal gain. This is how the scheme worked. Carr stacked the Florida Coalition of Domestic Violence board with beneficiaries of the organization's funding. And then at the end of the year, when the organization was supposed to return unused money that was not given directly to domestic violence centers to the state, it was then that she would arrange for the modification of her compensation in the form of bonuses, raises, and particularly paid time off. This allowed them to conceal the excessive compensation to Tiffany Carr. Paid time off would then be shown as a liability. It would not be reported immediately as compensation. And so over years, this was allowed to remain concealed. because it kept rolling over and accruing. Some of this paid time off was so excessive when it was accrued and rolled over that it amounted to millions of dollars when it was ultimately redeemed. And that is when calls came for a restructuring of this organization, and we leapt into action. And I just want to give you some examples of this egregious paid time off that was arranged and concealed. In 1 year, Tiffany Carr received 360 days of paid time off. Now, I'll just remind everyone that's 365 days in a year, and in 1 year it was 465 days of paid time off. Over a 3-year period after taxes, she received millions, and the compensation was so excessive that finally, when this money was redeemed, just prior to us coming into office, it triggered an excessive executive compensation tax liability under IRS rules, costing a nonprofit $1 million in tax penalties. So I'm going to restate that. A tax-exempt nonprofit that was supposed to help domestic violence victims using state money paid its executives so much they triggered a $1 million tax obligation. That is despicable. As the governor has said, this will not be tolerated in the state of Florida and under this administration. And I'm pleased to announce today that we have reached a settlement to recover millions for the state of Florida, millions from the foundation, which will be dissolved. Those monies will be sent directly to domestic violence centers, and the Florida Coalition of Domestic Violence and that foundation will be dissolved and its assets liquidated. In addition to the recovery of monies we're announcing today, when those assets are liquidated, DCF, which is the state agency primarily involved, will be the creditor in line to receive any assets and the amount of those assets and recovery from those dissolution. So we are excited today to announce this recovery. This is the resolution of the civil actions in this case. In no way does this resolve any prospective criminal actions. Those decisions will come at a later date. What was important to the governor and I was to ensure that as quick as possible, we could ensure that these organizations that were set up to provide for some of the most vulnerable victims in our state were reorganized, that they were done so in a way that this cannot happen again, that we could stop any misuse of taxpayer funds immediately and ensure that there was no disruption in services to domestic violence victims across the state. We were able to do that. These corrupt organizations will be dissolved, monies will be recovered to the state, and we look forward to moving forward and making sure that folks that are entrusted with monies and responsibilities in the state of Florida, whether you've been given that trust by voters, whether you've been given that trust by this administration, you will be held accountable if you violate that trust. If you use funds that were meant for Floridians, for victims, you are entrusted with that important responsibility. If you siphon off money corruptly for your own personal gain, you'll be held accountable. And so I thank the governor again for making this clear immediately upon taking office. Not only will he hold folks and is very detailed in making sure people live up to what they say they'll do in office, he's going to make sure that they execute their responsibilities with integrity and trust and accountability. I also want to thank House Speaker Chris Sprowls, the head of the House Integrity Committee, Chairman Leak. They sprang into action. They conducted an investigation that was very thorough and helped us in our efforts, and we will continue to work with the House as needed as we move forward to put in place ways that we can ensure this does not happen again in the state of Florida. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for helping us talk about this important resolution to this civil litigation. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them at this time.
General Moody, you've said millions of dollars are being recovered. That's a little vague. Can you give us a range? Are we talking 7 figures, 8 figures?
Certainly. Almost, and this is in the civil actions, we're resolving multiple civil actions, nearly $5 million, and that will come from Tiffany Carr, primarily, and officers and directors, insurance payments, and then from the foundation, those assets will be liquidated and distributed to domestic violence centers across the state.
Did the
Governor,
foundation
just
have any
one-
money
Let me
left?
take this one right here.
Governor, in 24 hours, the judge is expected to rule on the mask mandate in Leon County. If you lose, will you accept that decision, or will you continue to fight?
Oh, no, obviously, yeah, we'd appeal. We have our Attorney General here, maybe she would want to weigh in on the legal component of it, but yeah, no, we think, yeah, so, and obviously, if we win in district court, I'm sure it'll be, or in trial court, I'm sure it'll be appealed on the other side too. And so that's good. I mean, I think, we obviously need to have this stuff crystallized. We think, obviously, I'll let Ashley talk about, the law, but we feel that the legislature really made a big statement with their parental bill of rights, and that's an important piece of legislation, so go ahead.
I'm a parent of a young school-age child, in addition to being the Attorney General. I want to thank this governor who has said we have to protect the parents' ability to choose for their children under different circumstances. Many of these children have faced different health circumstances and parents should be able to make that choice as they're sending their child off to school. And so, I think, and the governor is right, the appropriate way to challenge something that you disagree with is to do that in court. We think the law is clear, and I think far too often, especially these days, you have elected officials. Look, all of us are concerned with the health and safety of Floridians, of Americans. We're going to keep doing everything in our effort and our powers to make sure that we are protecting our citizens. But that does not give anyone the right to disregard the rule of law, and the governor is correct. If there is an argument with a law, it should be challenged in court. Otherwise, you cannot flagrantly disregard statutes and orders in violation of law. It's pretty clear. It's a tenet of what our country is built on.
Governor,
I have
you've
an
been very
idea.
Let me
passionate.
take it right here.
Do you have any idea how many victims could have been affected by these actions of the coalition?
We have 42 domestic violence centers across the state. The Florida Coalition of Domestic Violence was the entity that was to coordinate, ensure they were living up to standards, and then pass through money as needed to those organizations. The problem here is Tiffany Carr stacked that board that determined how that money was distributed with many people that were allegiant to her, that participated in this scheme to cover up this excessive compensation. And so there are certain things that went on to allow for this to happen that we have accounted for. We will make sure never happens again. But our action was so important, and why we brought it so quickly after the House investigation uncovered so much of this was we needed to make sure there was no disruption of service to the centers, and that these centers could get that money that was intended for them to help aid victims, and that will be done through this bill.
Speaking of
Governor,
law,
you've been very passionate about your executive order on the mask mandate. Yesterday, you mentioned additional consequences for districts that aren't obeying this, that are forcing kids to wear masks here in Orange County. It's starting next week. What are those additional consequences?
Well, I think you'll hear an announcement from the Board of Education about the first two districts. That'll happen very soon. And then I know there's parents who've had their rights taken away who are going to pursue legal action. I think you will see that in some areas. And look, that when you do a Bill of Rights type of piece of legislation, obviously there may be certain enforcement mechanisms that like the state would do, and maybe in this case with penalties. The penalties will be applied to the politicians who violated the law. There'll be no penalties applied to school children or teachers or any of that. In fact, if teachers just follow state law, they'll be protected for doing that. So that'll be the penalties will be focused on the politicians. But when you have a Bill of Rights, if your individual right as a parent is violated, then you have the ability then to go in and seek vindication. They're obviously doing the opposite there in Tallahassee. They're trying to basically nullify the parent's Bill of Rights, but you can also do it from the other. And I would just note, it was a little bit, sometime in August of last year. Remember, we were being sued because we had the schools open and we said parents need to have the ability to send their kid to school. We got sued. We did lose in the trial court, and then we won on appeal resoundingly. and kids were able to go and get an education. And so that was something that was very, very important. But I do think that, you know, this will be resolved one way or another. I think the appeal will happen relatively quickly, and then you're going to have individual parents, because think about it. This, in terms of health, there's parents whose kids have not done well wearing the masks all day. Obviously, kids with special needs have not done well. Kids with autism, and then just kids who don't learn as well when they're not able, particularly the little kids, when they're not able to see some of the facial cues and being able to do some of that. And so it has taken a toll on kids throughout Florida. Now, not every parent maybe thinks that, but many, many do. And so, you know, they, I think, want to be able to send their kid in the best environment possible, understanding that there are some real drawbacks depending on the student situation. So I do think you're going to see that, and I also think from an evidence-based perspective, in that Leon County, I mean, they were not able to produce any control studies to show that there was a meaningful difference. In fact, the CDC, when they did their big Georgia study, they buried the conclusion, but they were looking to see like what mitigation worked, and they basically acknowledged that there wasn't a statistical significant difference between forced mask and optional mask school districts in Georgia last year. I think the same is true, you know, in Florida in terms of how that ended up working out. But just think about a kid who's already recovered from COVID. I mean, people have gotten it. Obviously, Delta is much further, it travels much quicker. So you have someone recovered, now they're in there, to have them wear a mask, if that's not something the parent wants, from a scientific basis, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that's going to have any effect, even if you think the cloth masks are doing a lot of to block the viral. This is somebody that there was a study just out of Israel showing again just how potent the immunity conferred from infection is. I mean, it does provide you protection. I know there's some that don't like to acknowledge it, but that clearly is a scientific fact at this point. So I think that there's a lot of basis for parents to look and say, hey, my kid's got special needs. I have rights under this statute. I'm going to go in. Or my kid has immunity from a prior infection, documented by all these different studies. You know, what possible basis does it serve to take my right away and to make them do it? So I think you're going to see a lot of that flushed out.
Governor, related to lawsuits in Tallahassee, a judge tomorrow also expected to rule about the unemployment, but the crisis a lot of people still have, they can't get through the DEO, claims are still stalled. I'm wondering if you can just give some insight on where the promised fixes are and where Dr. Scott.
So when you're looking at some of the claims, so most of the claims go through very quickly, fortunately. There's been a lot that's been done. Now, fortunately, we don't have nearly as many claims as we did a year and a half ago. But there are some claims where the employer will contest, where there's a need for verification. They go through that. It takes a little longer. You know, they are working to try to get to deal with that. But here's the issue. There's been attempts of fraud on our unemployment system, $10–20 billion worth of attempts. We've stopped, Dane Eagle will give you the exact number, we've stopped at least 10, I think up to $20 billion in fraudulent claims. We had over $1 billion in just 1 month, I remember, in January. And so that's what's happening. The system has to protect against that. And so if there's things that are flagged, they've got to go down and do it. So they are working hard to do it, but just they are being, it's not just Florida, inundated with fraudulent claims. This has become a major cottage industry. I think we have done, the amount of fraud that's been paid out in Florida is much less than many other states, because I think we've taken it our responsibility to try to protect the taxpayers on this and not do it. So you're going to end up with, I think, hundreds of billions of dollars throughout the country in just fraudulent unemployment claims will have ended up being paid out. And so we'll see the court. I can tell you this, in terms of unemployment, there are jobs available in Florida. You know, obviously, we had an upheaval in the economy nationwide in March of 2020, April, and it was tough times. And we worked to get this system up and running. It was a struggle there for some time, put a lot of resources in to be able to handle that. But now we're in a situation, we have 400 to 500,000 job openings in the state of Florida. If you go around, almost everyone wants to hire in some way or some form. And so, you know, the need to have elongated unemployment and all that is not where it was back then, because we have so many opportunities. And I think you're seeing that. I mean, some of these jobs, you're getting a signing bonus, you may be working at a fast food place or some of this other stuff because the need is so intense. There's some restaurants that are doing very well, but they have to close 1 or 2 days a week because they don't have enough folks to be able to work. So we're in a much different position. We obviously had almost 70,000 private sector jobs in July, and then we'll get the August numbers, but then September, because the extended window will end, I think you'll see even more folks. So I'm just confident there's people that want to hire you. If there weren't any place to go, if this were March of 2020, April 2020, look, it'd be a different ballgame. But we fortunately have a lot of opportunities now in Florida, and we want people to be able to seize those, to take advantage of those opportunities. And obviously, it's just good for our business. It's good for our economic base that these folks are able to kind of keep going and having the adequate